And we are live. It is another great day at Cribl. We're here today with the folks from Nth Degree, Fine Professional Services Organization. We have Paul Stout and Scott Gray. We're here to talk about everyone's struggle. If you're in IT, you've had professional service engagements that have frustrated you. You've had issues. You've run into things. You've had your time and materials contract run out and with no results. And so Paul and Scott have kindly come to talk and share stories, share especially about the pain, and they have ideas of how they want to do things a little bit differently. So Paul and Scott, can y'all introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Paul Stout. I'm a co-founder of Nth Degree as well as head of products and solutions. I've been writing code for almost 30 years. I have developed on several major big data platforms and bring the experience of that development to how we envision architecting outcome-based delivery.
Yep. Scott, what do you have to say?
Yeah, my name is Scott Gray. I'm also a founding partner over here at Nth Degree. I'm responsible for the delivery and partnerships here. I've been in IT for 30 years. I've been leading, PS, CSM, MSP teams for about 20 years. And I really appreciate the opportunity for the discussion today.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about yourself. So where are y'all located? Paul?
I'm out in Northern California, just above the Bay Area.
Oh, great. What about you, Paul?
Until a year ago, I was in the lower Bay Area. Now I'm in Denver, Colorado.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm in Atlanta. It's hot. Looking forward to fall. Hopefully things cool down a little bit. How about y'all?
Likewise, I didn't appreciate how being closer to the sun meant higher UV, even at lower temperatures. So it's not necessarily hot, but it's still scorching here.
It's a great way to get a tan.
Yeah, I can't complain about weather out here in California. I've lived in other parts of the country. I know how hot and humid it is everywhere else. So I'm pretty happy where I'm at.
Yeah, you know why people fight to be in California.
That's the California tax.
Yeah, exactly. So just get back to the subject at hand. I mean, I've had this before where you work with teams, you buy yourself a new tool, you buy yourself a new technology, then you engage services. I need that lift, I need that step up in order to make sure that I've set up the tool correctly. You go to the vendor, you set up a contract, but they very carefully they talk about, we're not promising you much. We got time, we have materials. We don't get this accomplished, you're going to have to come back and pay us more. And so that was always a little frustrating because you're struggling, especially to pick up new tools, and you want to get started off right. And that it can be such an issue, and especially in modern IT. Everyone's thin, and you don't have the ability to devote 8 hours a day to your professional service engagement for 6 months in order to get things going right. And so, tell me, what are your experiences? What's the pain that y'all have seen, and what are your solutions?
I would say, I was over at Splunk running the PS team for WCT for about 5 years. And, it always seemed like, there's obviously a lot of activity out there, a lot of work going on for customers, but it never really seemed to fully scratch the itch. And it was never, vendors and customers were never fully in alignment, right? It was always, it's always traditionally been in the vendor's favor. When you're running PS, it's time for money. Like you say, if you run out of time before you get what the customer was asking for, then you got to go back to the well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, before you were, in your current position, can you give some examples of where, where you ran into this or what happened?
Paul,
my experiences. Yeah, absolutely. In my experiences, some of the major pain points, and I've seen this happen firsthand, you generally have a very long time to negotiate statements of work. And if business requirements change mid-flight, then you're stuck with negotiating a change order at that point or finding ways to creatively allocate what you've gotten.
Right.
It's very rare that you get everything that you asked for. And you might not know that until after you already have a consultant assigned. And that consultant may be really, really good at what they do, but a certain part of the scope just wasn't spelled out properly. And when you get there, you realize, well, we just don't have the skills to do that. So I've seen contracts almost lost, escalations over this very thing.
Yeah, it's a real issue.
There's also a tendency, I think, what I've seen year after year is a lot of that SOW driven PS work, many times the SOW was written 6 months ago. It was information that was collected 9 months ago. It's taken that long to go through the process and get signatures on the line for everybody. It's a weird sensation also for the consultants. They're coming in, they think they've been aligned for success with the customer, but oftentimes when they get on site and they assess the situation, they see a lot of deficiencies and shortcomings that need to be addressed before they could do the work that they were brought there for. And I think that's where kind of the muddy mess starts and where escalations begin.
I agree. It's too often you're talking to some project manager, not the actual people who are doing the work. And that creates a massive issue with alignment. And it gets real frustrating. I've had this same thing where I've worked in, it's like, hey, I want to talk to the person, I want to talk to the person who's going to be doing this work as well, because we got to make sure we're all aligned. So how do y'all do it? So if I'm coming to you as a vendor and I'm coming to you as a customer and say, hey, I've just bought this new tool. I've just bought Cribl. Hey, I need your help to implement it. And so how are you going to get engaged with the customer to define outcome-based solutions?
I think we're batching up fairly closely. Cribl's got your silver, gold, platinum activation services. That's really the critical 90 days of the customer journey to ensure they get off to a good start, to ensure that we're actually able to stick the landing. I think 2 use cases is the silver, 3 is the gold, 5 is the platinum. And you absolutely want to ensure that you can stick that landing with the customer. Under the old PS model, you'd be effectively burning hours, 40 hours for 2 use cases, 80 for 3, 120 for 5, and then you're out of time. What our approach is we're saying we're going to sign up for same dollar amount for the 2, 3, or 5 use cases, and the outcome is guaranteed. Whether we overshoot it or undershoot it on the hours, we're committed to delivering that outcome to the customer.
Real quick, Ed, if I may, you
Sure.
mentioned just a moment ago that you quite often want to speak with the person who's doing the work. So there's 2 things that are really, really different about the way this is delivered. One is it's all ticket based. So the moment you have a technician assigned to that, you can interact with that technician directly through that ticket and ask questions. As far as determining scope and the flexibility of that, the 2, 3, or 5 outcomes are generally set during discovery, during onboarding. But
Right.
you have the flexibility of pivoting on one of those outcomes at any time, right up until we start work on it. Because the beauty of an outcome-based model and doing it as a solution is that you can fit the right task to the right person
Right.
at any time in the process.
Do you switch the consultants that are working on a particular job based on based upon the desired outcome? Say, for example, I need to pull data from Azure, but I need to send it to another tool. So is your Azure person maybe not familiar with the destination, your data destination, like Elastic?
Absolutely. And the ticket can change a technician multiple times through that ticket's life cycle. So to your point about Azure, having your Azure expert on it, and then going to your Amazon, your AWS expert on it. Absolutely.
Nice. But I think also, but who does the discovery? I mean, is that your project manager doing discovery, or your consultants also based on doing the discovery and defining the scope?
That's generally going to be a tag team between someone with broad knowledge of it and a domain expert. So what would traditionally be called a technical account manager, and then a consultant on that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I heard them called project managers, things like that. But totally, yeah, that totally makes sense. And so, can you give me some examples? So how this has worked out versus some of maybe your past experience? So let's just walk through a situation. So, hey, I'm going to be your customer. I need to engage you. I need to do this, this, and this. And so how would I approach y'all, and how would this be different from, say, if I was going to a traditional services company?
Paul, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as far as engaging us is, we understand that the customer would come to us wanting a rapid adoption. We select a number of use cases. As we are onboarding to our service, we're going to go through and define what those use cases are. And quite often a customer is not going to know what they want. So we have a library that we can look at their environment, understand what data is there, and find opportunities to suggest those use cases. At that point, there's a litany of tickets that get created with our ticketing system. And I'm using rapid adoption as an example for this because I think it's immediately relatable. Some of those are foundational, getting Cribl stood up, getting sources configured, destinations configured, getting the worker groups configured. All of that's going to be ubiquitous. And we're going to have a Cribl certified consultant on that. The outcomes then are then logged as tickets with a specific outcome of this data source from this source to this destination, right? Or this data source, but let's find ways that we can reduce the volume on that, or find ways that we can possibly roll it up into metrics. And so at that point, those tickets are going to be worked in series. And the beauty of doing this is that it's ultimate flexibility on the customer side. We can work on things independently on the back end. And whenever we need customer engagement from that, we send them a meeting request. Everything is tied in through our scheduling system. If the customer wants to get ahead of that and needs some time with us, again, back to your point, Ed, just let me talk to the person who's working on it.
Right.
Every single communication from that has a button where you can get on the assigned technician's calendar, possibly within 4 hours, pending availability on it. At that point, we're going to start, again, working those in series. And at that point, the ticket is going to be assigned to the person most knowledgeable for that stage of the development. So configuring Cribl sources, configuring pipelines, transformations, configuring destinations and outputs.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And so that's good. So, and how are you basing this? Is it time and materials, or is it based upon the request? I mean, how is success? But how do you define success?
We're gonna be doing these outcome based. So depending on which level you have, obviously there's hours that we're tracking. We're going to track all effort that we put against this. We can always infinitely report out our effort, but the key thing is we're not driving billing based on number of hours. We set that at the beginning of the engagement based on silver, gold, or platinum.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's ideal because I think because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what your customers want. They're more focused on the outcomes, and that's important that they be able to achieve that. And so, can you, in your previous work, can you have any kind of personal stories that you can share of where something went off the rails and how you've learned from it?
Oh, you got an example on that?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I worked at a large healthcare provider, and we had contracted professional services to help with an upgrade and migration of one of our data systems. And at a certain point, we came across that the person didn't have the skill set to take care of a major task of this. Right. So the challenge was then that the entity providing the professional services ended up spending a fair amount of additional time. We ended up having to alter scope on it. Ultimately, as the customer, we didn't get what we want. The professional services organization that was delivering it got a bit of a smear on their name for not properly scoping it, and we ended up having to, again, we being the customer, we ended up having to perform all of that work that we had paid for already. Right. Because we got to a point where the consultant just couldn't handle it. Conversely, in an outcome based, the way that would have been handled is the vast majority of the setup and testing for that would have been performed by this consultant, and then it would have been instantly flipped to an expert that could have taken care of that last mile and then finally delivered. So it would have saved everyone time, everyone frustration, and ultimately ended up with a better outcome, better solution.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, especially being able to change, because I think that's the thing is, and that's always a struggle when you're in a services organization, that you got a certain number of hours and a certain number of engineers, and you have to try to assign them. And having one engineer on one job is typically just not flexible enough. You rarely see one person knowing enough to do everything. And so being able to switch depending upon the need, I think, is very, very valuable. And that's something I would definitely like to see more often, because these are complex things. Expecting one engineer to be able to handle the end-to-end engagement is just not reasonable.
Totally agree.
Just not reasonable at all. So anything else, any other kind of stories that you can share? So how about for a successful engagement, how it went and the differences?
I'm going to say, oh, go ahead, Scott.
No, you go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
One of the most successful engagements that I saw, and this was built on time and materials, which I think it made it more expensive than it had to be. But the engineers that were assigned to that engagement, there were multiple engineers of multiple skill levels, and they were more or less plugging into a software development, a CI/CD pipeline. And so this was run on Jira through Scrum, through Agile, and almost emulating, but with a basis of hours, the model that we're talking about here. But rather than plugging into that CI/CD on the customer side, running our own ticketing operations, and then having that flexibility. Because what happened at the customer side is that
Mhm.
if an engineer was assigned to a Jira story and you realize that you got in a little bit over your head, and we saw that happen a couple of times, you could very quickly flip it over to someone else on the team and then have that person step in and take whatever the reassigned engineer was working on. So that wasn't without its challenges, right? Because it was still statement of work based, and anything that came in out of bounds of that, we had to be careful as the customer writing the statement of work broadly enough so that we had that flexibility. But it's almost like we were thinking about this a few years ago when we had that project.
Yeah, totally. I mean, hey, inspiration comes where you get it from. Absolutely. So let's talk about broadly for the professional services industry. Where do you see this going?
And we
You,
think professional services is dead. It just doesn't know it yet.
Mhm.
Customers want more flexibility. Customers want outcomes rather than buckets of hours. Customers don't want to be told, well, you're out of time, so either buy more or handle it yourself. And within probably 5 to 10 years, everything is going to move toward an outcome-based solution, or those that can't transform to this will no longer be relevant.
Yeah, I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna make a meme out of that because I got to say that that is perfect. You're dead. You just don't know it yet. But I think that's important. I mean, and I think the shift to value is critically important. I think people very frustrated when they pay a substantial amount of money, don't get what they pay. Just like you were mentioning when you're working at a healthcare company, you get incredibly frustrated by that. I mean, your gut
Absolutely.
delivery, you need expertise, and that's all about. And this is a huge problem in the technical industry. You bring in a tool, and it's a huge skill set and expertise, and it's a big lift. Learning, these tools are not easy to use, and you need time, you need expertise, training. You just, the days of throwing a book at someone and say, hey, just go figure it out. We just don't have time for that. You've got to be able to you have to be able to enact transformation too fast, and so that's where you need the expertise that services provide, but it has to be better, it has to be more flexible.
Absolutely. And
Hmm.
Ed, I'd follow that with one more point.
Hmm.
Customers want a solutions provider who's willing to share some of the risk.
Right.
And Scott mentioned earlier about legacy services and how it's usually in favor of the service provider or the vendor. With outcome based, you have no choice but to share the risk with your customer. So you start to build that trust right away because you're both invested in the delivery of that outcome.
So do you see do you see other providers moving to outcome based, or is that something that's still fairly new?
I think it's something that's on everybody's mind. TSI has been preaching this for many years. They have a great book that came out.
So
Uh,
who's TSI?
TSIA, Technology Services Industry Association,
Okay.
fantastic organization. They basically benchmark hundreds and hundreds of IT departments and companies, and kind of have a crystal ball into the future because of all that work that they do. And they've been preaching this for years. They came out with a fantastic book last summer called Digital Hesitation. That just, the case is made, and I think they stuck the landing on the case that they made. I think the challenge for legacy shops is the transformation from being PS to being subscription. Our strategy was coming in native subscription. What
Right.
we've seen far too often is, if you've got PS, that's the big dollars. Traditionally, that's where your dollars came from, and that's where your best people are. And you might put a principal on the subscription side of the house and a bunch of junior people. Our
Right.
approach is completely different. We're going all native subscription. All of only senior veteran big data players are on the team.
That's good. Yeah, that's that's always another thing when you get the senior person's there on the first day of the engagement, and the
That's right.
fresh out of college person's there on the second. That's
Yeah.
always another like, okay. Hey,
Completely.
Gary. Also said Gary, thank you for the comment. Appreciate it. Gary from LinkedIn. So what else do you think? So what kind of things you engage in? What do you see going on for the future?
really see it's as we've said, we're moving to the outcomes-based solution. I think the advantages of that model are very clear. One of the things that you're going to get with that model is a demonstrable ROI and a repeatable, proven process. If you think about the Cribl Rapid Adoption package, that basically the customer outcome that they're getting is they know for a fixed price they're going to realize 2, 3, or 5 use cases fully implemented, done correctly. And on the Cribl side, it's basically about confidence that customer in 90 days, we're going to be able to professionally stand that customer up on your platform and get them to 25% or greater adoption on the license that they purchased.
And that's great.
And
yeah,
one more thing on that too is that's for the rapid adoption. So that's a finite, a predictable 2-3-5 outcomes, right? You asked where the future is going, and we've kind of had two different tracks of this discussion going. We've had outcome based on one side, and we've had subscription based. So I'm going to mesh those together right now. With our Mesh Care service, you can actually subscribe to an ongoing number of outcomes for your platform. So think about the rapid adoption, the five outcomes from that. Once that's complete, another big challenge with professional services is you're left holding the ball when they leave. Right. So giving the customers the option to subscribe to ongoing buckets of value out of that is where we really see the future going with this. And if you think about it, Ed, when was the last time you took a taxi or bought a CD?
Last week.
Okay, well, that was not the answer I was expecting. Most people, that's going to be, you're an outlier, Ed, and I'll give you that. For the vast majority of people, they're going to call an Uber. They subscribe to Spotify, right? So Apple Music. They're going to stream their movies. Think about enterprise software. No one buys and installs a CRM in-house. Who still manages Exchange in-house? So you can see these shifts from ownership to subscription, from ownership to value, or to consumption almost. And services is going to go the same way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good model too, because I think it gives a lot more flexibility. Like when I was a customer, if I could have had something available like that, and where it's a ticket instead of a having a work order or having an SOW that had to be approved by legal or something like that, that would have given me a lot more flexibility to say, hey, I need you this week to do this, but I don't need you next week. And so that would have given me a lot more flexibility. I think it would have given you a lot more flexibility too as a services provider. I think having that subscription capability is pretty important. So one thing I'd ask is, so how are you going to avoid having to do statements of work and things like that with the subscription service? Do you have the right kind of contract in order to handle that?
Yeah, we've basically matched up. We're not trying to recreate the wheel here. Cribl did a great job of laying out their packages, kind of what the scope on those things are. We just grabbed that. We're cooking by the same recipe. We're just doing it outcome based.
Very good. I like that. So,
and to your point on that, some of the outcomes are predefined, but this is something where you can't just sprint full speed on it. So you could very rapidly get into a situation where you're eating the substantial amount of the cost because of that guaranteed outcome. So it's all about starting with processes that repeatable processes that customers are going to ask for, and then building from there, increasing the scope of what you consider an outcome. Because right now, to take the Cribl for an example, a use case is an outcome. So that's from source, transformation, destination, and that's your outcome. Customers want those outcomes to be increase our revenue, decrease our costs, reduce the number of security incidents. And that's what you want to build toward.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to have a webinar coming up really soon, where we're going to talk about the difference between the business and technical outcomes and how you have to match those things up in order to be successful. Because I think that is a key point that's too often overlooked in the engineering community.
Hey, Paul, could you hit on a few of those other flexibility points that we have with our service?
Yeah. So, we mentioned we've got the quicker engagement, eliminating the statement of work. You're talking about changing the scope, changing the definition of an outcome right up until you start working on it. An example we thought of yesterday is you've subscribed to 5 outcomes per period. And you get toward the end of that period, you're just about to start work on the 5th one, and all of a sudden a CVE with a score of 8 drops. Probably need the flexibility to be able to pivot and get that data on. And with the subscription model, you can absolutely do that. You can change. Another great part about our service is a lot of providers are willing to negotiate that contract up at any
Hmm.
given point. We think customers should have the flexibility to go both ways.
Right.
Customers should be able to, if you realize something's not working, pivot and not only change the desired outcome, again, within a predefined library, but also realizing, hey, we bit off more than we can chew here. Or, right now, I think that services organizations around the world are feeling the crunch of budgets shrinking.
Yeah.
So being able to scale it down, continue providing outcome for that customer within the scope of what they can afford to pay, gives the flexibility to continue providing value and is also keep the customer.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Really appreciate that. So I think we're coming to the end of the half hour. So do y'all have anything you want to say to wrap up?
Well, make a couple of points here. What we're doing is kind of, there's a lot of roles, a lot of post sales roles that are traditionally in software companies. You got PS, CSM, TSAMs, a lot of people with their finger in their pie trying to do it. I think that the trend is having, those roles are collapsing under this model where, we have recurring customer value alignment sessions. And those to me are the way that we always make sure that we stay in sync with our customer. If an adjustment needs to be made, that's where we make it on those calls. I also think the customer engagement model sweet spot under subscription approach is maintaining empathetic and cohesive engagement with all clients across all functional areas and touch points is going to be key. And kind of the differentiator is, we're leveraging domain expertise and service capabilities to enable customers' business success instead of simply implementing or teaching them how to use a product.
What comes to me for closing thoughts, Ed, the industry is changing. We've mentioned seeing decades of transformations from ownership to subscriptions, and customers want this change. They might not necessarily know it yet because I don't think anyone has successfully delivered on this, but we've mentioned the underlying factors of that, the flexibility, the ability to scale up or down. The reality is this shift is going to happen whether people want to or not. So we chose to get ahead of it.
Hey, got to admire that. I think it's, and change is good. I think especially in terms of service delivery, a lot of people, engineers, managers, architects, they need y'all's help in order to be effective. And so in having better models of delivering help, it's just something everyone needs to see. So I'm totally there for it. I'll be very excited to see how y'all do, because I think it's a great partnership between Nth Degree and Cribl. And I'm excited to how y'all expand your services into other technologies, because it's pretty exciting. So can y'all share your website and also your LinkedIn handle?
I can. Do you want me just to say it out loud, or?
Yeah, I just did. Yeah. I mean, so that way, so people hear it.
Sure. That's going to be nthdegree.io is the website.
All right,
and I'm pretty certain it's at Nth Degree on LinkedIn. But let me just be.
It is
sure
so, but the spelling, so NTH and then degree. So I just want people to be able to find y'all. Make sure. So for the audience, make sure you're all taking a look at this. Go ahead and follow these guys on LinkedIn. Get engaged if you need help with services, because I think this is a great way to have to engage and get the help you need with your technology, especially with Cribl. Just a couple of wrap up items. So really appreciate everyone's time and attention. So if you don't forget to follow Cribl on LinkedIn. So CRIBL at Cribl. I'm CRIBL at LinkedIn for our website. Cribl.io if you want to, and also don't forget about our community Slack. We're at 7,000 active users right now. It's really enjoy engaging with the community. So it's community.cribl.io, and you'll be able to sign up for Slack. Go, Paul. Sorry.
Ed, I've got one correction on that. Our LinkedIn handle is at Nth Degree World, all one word.
Oh, okay. There you go. And that's why I wanted to put it out there, so that way your people can see it. And so follow these guys on LinkedIn, get engaged. Also, get engaged, follow Cribl on LinkedIn as well. So we really appreciate it. We are moving from the site formerly known as the Bird site to LinkedIn and as our focus. So please, I'm myself active in the community and Slack. Also, don't hesitate. I'm on the Bird side as well. eBailey 1367. Always looking to get engaged. Always looking to answer questions. And hey, come join me on the live stream. So Paul, and also I really appreciate Scott being here. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's really informative, and I really thank you for your time.
Thanks
All
for
right,
having us today, Ed. It was a pleasure to be
Yep.
here.
Hey, and have a great afternoon. We'll talk soon. I see Scott coming back. There we go.
Sorry about that, folks. Had a glitch.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Hey, if technology worked all the time, we wouldn't have jobs. And so,
That's right.
hey, but I really appreciate it. And Scott, thank you for being here. I'm encouraging everyone to follow you all on LinkedIn and get engaged. We really appreciate it.
Much appreciated. Right.
Hey, for all of our audience, have a great afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.